Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The life and cruel punishments of a Tudor woman. Tudor England is today mostly known for its brutality and a series of monarchs who struck fear into a nation and a shockwave of religious turmoil. But what I would like to discuss today is the punishments issued to individuals, and more specifically the punishments faced by women. Along with punishments, I also want to look into how women were treated in general. It is certainly a stark contrast to today's standards. The position of a woman has remained unchanged for centuries, and the Tudor era saw very little improvements, even though it was home to two queens. Both Queen Mary I and Queen Elizabeth I, although essentially the head of the country, did very little for the advancement of women or their rights. Women and girls had been told for centuries that they were inferior to men, and their behaviour in turn cemented this. This was taught by the church, and the belief was justified by the use of the Bible. Surely the word of God must mean that it's true. So both men and women spent their lives growing up and believing that a woman was less than a man, and that this was the order of God. Even though the Tudor era saw a religious reformation, there was no change, and the Protestant leader John Knox even wrote, "Woman in her greatest perfection was made to serve and obey man." You see, a young girl was taught from a very young age to obey her parents, and their father would be the head of the household, with brothers, uncles and male family friends even expecting obedience. A stark contrast between boys and girls is that a girl would typically not receive any education, whereas a boy would. A girl would be taught that their sole purpose in life was to marry, have children, and look after their home and husband. They were also taught that God had commanded them to be obedient to men, be it father or husband. Girls from a poor home received no education, as we would recognise it. They learnt skills from their life, from their mothers. Girls from the homes of the rich received some form of education, but it was in things like managing a household, needlework, and meal preparation. It was generally believed that teaching girls to read and write was a waste of time. Two of Henry VIII's wives were barely literate. These were Jane Seymour and Catherine Howard. Now, if you were a woman born into a rich family, you would have no choice over whom you married, as marriage was frequently arranged in a way that would benefit the family. Love was irrelevant, and it was certainly not unusual for a woman to meet her husband for the first time on their wedding day. There was also no law to protect girls from being married off at a young age, and most would be married by the time they were 14. A troubling thought is that, in fact, once a girl reached the age of 14, in many cases she was seen as too old and would therefore be a liability within her family home. Once a woman was married, she then, in the eyes of society, had one job, and that was to produce a son, a boy who could grow up and continue the family line. This was the same for everyone, be it royalty or the poorest of poor. In Tudor England, pregnancy, and especially childbirth, was dangerous for the wife. Death in childbirth was not unusual, and one tradition at this time was for a wife to prepare a new baby's nursery, but to also make arrangements for the baby should she, the mother, die in childbirth. Now, another sad fact about being a woman in Tudor England was the control of what you were allowed to wear. A woman who was not married was not permitted to wear her hair down, and married women had to hide under a veil and a hood. The only exception was that a queen may wear her hair down on a state occasion, but this was only tolerated due to the fact that she had to wear a crown. Even Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's feisty second wife, did as she was told in relation to her appearance. Her hair was that long that she could sit on it, but after her marriage to the king, she wore it hidden away in a hood. The dress code for a woman hadn't changed much in relation to the previous centuries. They were still expected to wear clothing that covered nearly everything, and even summer dresses were required to reach the floor. Now, in relation to how a woman was treated differently when it came to crime and punishment, there are only a few additional devices that were designed for the sole purpose of a woman. An execution or punishment would have been altered in most occasions, but there were a number of devices and methods used, and if you visit places like the Tower of London, you can still see today examples of these barbaric and bloody forms of punishment, torture and execution. But one of the first devices we're going to talk about is the scold's bridle. The word scolds in this case merely meant woman, and the bridle was used on those who disturbed their neighbour's peace with loud quarrelling, gossiping, slanderous speech or brawling. The device was used to hurt and humiliate a woman who was deemed as using speech and behaviour that was thought to be too offensive or unruly. This device resembled a bridle of a horse, but was made out of metal and placed over the woman's head. A plate would then be inserted into the woman's mouth, which would then force her tongue down and prevent her from speaking. Sadly, these plates could often be fitted with spikes to really ensure that a woman's tongue was well and truly tamed. It is also believed that a woman who spoke her mind or sounded off too loudly was punished by a form of waterboarding. This would involve a woman being attached to a chair at the end of a beam and being dunked into some water repeatedly. These were known as chucking stools. The action was thought to cool the woman off. Now, there was also an adapted version of this to determine if a woman was a witch. You see, if she floated, she was a witch, or if she sunk, then she was innocent. A term used in Tudor England was a scold, and being a scold was illegal. It meant that a woman perhaps nagged her husband or spoke loudly or backtalked, and being labelled a scold was no small thing. Neighbours would often deal with these scolds, or shrews for another word, themselves to evade the law. The community would stage a shavarari, also known as rough music, a skimmington and carting. Clanging pots and pans, townspeople would gather in the streets, their music drawing attention to the offending scold, who often rode backwards on a horse or mule. You see, she faced the wrong way to symbolise the transgressive reversal of gender roles. Many women suffered at the hands of others, and at the mercy of the shavarari, the chucking stool and the scold's bridle. Women were usually paraded through town, and sadly, some scold bridles included things like ropes or chains so that the husband could lead her through the village. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.